All right, Matt, we're in.
We're
uh,
in.
Technical peril. Hey, I've got a new background. We didn't even get to talk about it.
Oh
It's
yeah,
not very nice.
very
The,
Dexter-esque.
it's my kill room. We're about to slay some sup analysis, bro.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm gonna go for like black next time. It's gonna be like very sort of like, where in the world is Adam
Mm.
Tischler?
Oh, I
And
like that.
yeah, the answer ahead of time is in a basement in Seattle. Just to I don't want to give away
Oh,
the ending, but that's what it is at the end of the day.
yeah, and anticlimactic a little bit, I'll admit, but
What are you gonna do? We're not about building suspense. We're about like unraveling suspense, really.
sure.
Hey, speaking of, there was some good racing, some suspenseful racing this last weekend. We wanted to cover off on a couple of things. One of them was the race in Bordeaux, France, on the river there, Gargonne, I think.
Yeah, the
Really
Bordeauxan
interesting.
event.
Yeah, that's right.
I do love a good pun. They nailed it.
Yep, French, English, it works either way. Um, hey, so really interesting. Blue Ewer comes away with his first major victory, I think we would say. Uh,
Hmm.
um, Erie Tenorio continues to show well, came in with second place. And then I think the news of the day, this is what I really want to get into, was Michael Booth was dominating a race once again, but this was a river race with really high flow, like really high flow that would probably decimate most paddlers. These guys were powering through it, but it got the better of Michael Booth because he made a read. And I think it's got us thinking about the role that river races could play, particularly in something like the Euro Cup or the Euro Tour, where you've got these sort of stage races and being able to vary it. Your take? I mean, you watched as enthralled as I did, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it was just super interesting and different, if nothing else, than what we're used to seeing on the international race scene. And I don't. We talked about this a little bit. I don't envy being in the front in a race like that. Like, obviously, being in first is never bad, right? But being able to watch somebody go before you, you can kind of see relative speeds on what line they take and everything. And if you go read Boothie's really introspective post
Yeah,
after the
it's a
race,
post mortem.
yeah, yeah, basically, it's like, look, like I took that same line on the first lap and I was in first, but everybody else also took that line the first lap. So he's like, well, if it worked, why would I change it? So I don't blame him in that sense. Um, but yeah, the current was really ripping, like to the point where guys were barely making it around the buoy
Yeah,
before they were turning around.
yeah.
It was wild.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us have been in those races where the buoy turn is just incredibly fraught because you're sort of like ferrying into it. You have to
Hmm.
start the turn way early. I know there's a race we do here in Seattle called the Narrows Challenge, which is in Tacoma Narrows. It's this like place where like Puget Sound gets squeezed into a neck, and the current, like you're going like 10 miles an hour with it. And if you don't start making the turn really early, you will shoot 200-300 yards past it in a blink of an eye. And that, it wasn't quite that much, but it was not unlike that.
It probably wasn't far off. I mean, in the first lap, I think it was Connor hit the buoy first and like started to turn and look good. And before he knew it, his board was slammed into the side of the buoy. And luckily, they're inflatable, so it was no big deal. But yeah, just super different. Really emphasizes a different skill set besides just your physiological capabilities, right? It's like you're on the fly decision making while your brain is full of cortisol and adrenaline and a whole bunch of other
Yeah.
things that make you feel punch drunk in the moment. So it was really cool to see, in Blue Ewer's post race recap, he talks very much about he was in the front group. Calamity ensues. He ends up in like 15th place or something. Coming around that second lap, Boothie goes out to the same line and a bunch of other guys follow him. He sees Connor take a different line and is going pretty well. So he says, well, what do I have to lose? And he's also like young and has a real motor on this kid.
Yeah.
Uh, and just gobbled Connor up, ended up hitting the buoy in first and ran away with the race all of a sudden, just kind of on a what do I have to lose gamble decision. It's pretty cool.
Totally. Something interesting popped in my head, and you and I always kind of talk about what we're going to talk about beforehand, and without getting too deep, so we got fresh material. I got some real fresh material. I had this thought. Okay, um, if there's a couple thoughts here, stay with me. If Connor doesn't go, do the other guys go? I don't think so. I and here's why. We have seen the men's field for like 7 years now. Hand first, I shouldn't say hand, seed first place to Boothie. And like, I don't know, 2/3 of all races he enters. He comes out, blows the doors off. Everyone lets him go and starts fighting for 2nd through 5th or 2nd through 3rd place. I think if it's not Connor who breaks, that they don't go on their own. Like I'm not convinced that Blue, and I would love to hear from them. I'm not convinced that Blue or Erie or any of the others go, screw this, I'm taking the other side by myself.
Oh, I see. So is the question, is it that it was Connor or is it that it was someone, right? Like if somebody
Both.
else in the top 5 were to
If
go.
if I'm Erie and I see Blue go or vice versa, do I go with them or do I say Michael knows something? I would love to be able to run the race over and just kind of see these work out. But the fact that it's
Sure.
Connor is like an automatic decision in my
True.
mind.
True.
Like you see this guy, he's like maybe one of the only like absolute Mount Rushmore figures in the men's field at this point. You could there's a bunch of others you could put up there, but like he's guaranteed a spot. You see him go, expert waterman. I mean, granted, like he's known for ocean stuff, but like this guy's been on all the water everywhere. And if you see him making a move and you know Boothie's like, you got nothing to lose there. That's the risk you make because what you're fighting for at that point is 2nd place in your mind. Now, it didn't work out that way, right? I mean, so what happens is that Boothie's line was awful in retrospect. And so they wind up fighting for 1st, which is amazing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you hear good athletes talk all the time that like at the pointy end of stuff when everybody's more or less the same speed, you're not going to beat someone on their own line in a conditions race, whether it be upwind or downwind, unless you're all of a sudden paddling a totally different gear than somebody else. And that's very like unlikely to happen with somebody like Boothie leading out the race, right?
Exactly.
And I think Connor talks about in his Instagram post after the race having been there for a week or so and having taken the time to read the river and check it out at certain times a day so that he knew what to look for on the day. Of course, like, yeah, if you see Connor, to your point, with his reputation about making good water reading decisions, gamble across the river and you're behind him, you might think to do the same thing for sure.
So 2 things, and I'm loath to pretend that Boothie didn't look at this or that I know something he doesn't because that guy's forgotten more about reading water than I'll ever know. But when you look at the overhead map of where they were, the bend in the river, I actually think that the side the guys took was the right call. You just with the way the river bent, faster water goes outside. Boothie was on the outside bend at that point of the river. It sort of does an S turn. So I understand why you would make certain decisions. It's not like a totally clear cut decision or he would have made it. But you can see how they gained the advantage, especially as they approached that buoy at the top of the course. So here's the other interesting thing. So then like it literally, they come together and it's sort of like the slow speed version of a Peloton kind of going a roundabout. They meet and they're really close. Boothie was only like, I don't know, 50 yards behind him. I mean, it was like striking range with his skill for sure. Here's what's super interesting, and this is the other thing we didn't run over. He couldn't do it. Like he had worked too hard going uphill against the current. And you would think he would mow down. Connor doesn't do a lot of distances, great as he is. Erie and Blue also great, but Boothie's shown that he can decimate people who are not quite his equal. He couldn't do it. He had burned too much going out hard and then going up current. It got me thinking about this. Goes back to the Boothie destroying people, blowing the doors off at the start of a race. If I'm one of those guys, I look at this and go, wait a minute. If he goes through some hardship and we stay in contact and he can't mow us down at the end of the race, does that change the way I think about my strategy at the beginning of a race? Like if I'm Blue and Erie, I'm recruiting 1 or 2 other guys going, listen, we're not letting him get away at the beginning of a race. Like I'd be so full of confidence that like if you can punish him, and here's where I'm going with this, and then I'll shut up and I want to get your thoughts. Um, we both are fans of the Netflix um documentary series on the Tour de France, and last year, either if you watch the real Tour de France or if you watch the documentary, you'll see there's a point when this one cycling team goes after the red jersey wearer, the race leader, and they want to decimate him essentially. And these two guys just toy with him like an orca messing with the seal, just tiring him out, separate him from the team, attack that he has to respond. The next guy attacks, he has to respond while the other guy recovers. And it was just they tear this guy to pieces. And if I see Boothie go out hard, and I know I've got three other guys with me who are willing to go hard with him and draft and stay with him and do everything it takes, I would say, man, we got a shot at winning first, second, and third potentially if we get after him enough. So that's my thinking. Like we've seen people surrender first place to Boothie over and over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. I think, well, first, yeah, if anybody's into racing, we highly recommend watching that Tour de France documentary.
Any kind of racing, by the way.
It's quite riveting, yeah. Yeah, the racer we're talking about there is the guy Tadej Pogačar, who had been the two-time defending champion. Yeah, yellow jersey wearer, to your point. And I think it's interesting, like the collaborative effort, you're starting to see it sometimes in like national team stuff at ICF and ISA. And actually, to that point, there was something interesting. If you saw the jet ski on the live stream, the guy on the back of the jet ski was Elaine Turcotil, who's the NSP designer / unofficial wizard and all that kind of stuff. So you got to imagine he's out there looking at the river, yelling to guys, I assume at least on the NSPs, if not other people, other French riders or whatever. Yeah, but I wonder, like, I remember back to like the Corfu race on the EuroTour a couple years ago. I want to say that was about 6 or 7 miles, and Boothie took off in like the first 10 minutes of the race, and there were 9 guys in the draft pack, and they were trading off, and they just couldn't close him down still. So then you wonder, is like, okay, maybe they have tried this.
It is interesting. By the way, there's some saxophone playing elsewhere in the USA SUP studios in Seattle. So if you hear that bleeding through, that's why.
No, I can't hear anything.
Okay. It's wonderful. It's dramatic. For the tone of this segment. I have this feeling like he is, to use the parlance of the day, living rent free in most of the field's heads when it comes to distance racing. And there's only a very few guys, Shrimpy, Nowick, and I think other guys have confidence in themselves. I'm not trying to say that that's otherwise. I just think that they see him go and say, okay, I can't, like, I know for my race, second sounds pretty good to me, instead of a check for, 3,000 euros, like 1,500. Well, that's what I'm racing for now, because otherwise it's zero if I try to stay with him and blow up. I'm not convinced that anyone said, we're going to give it a go here and just full on, like, made a pact, like, the 4 of us are going to go after him and try it. And look, there's a lot to risk there. I totally understand why they don't, but seeing him not able to pull it off in the end because he had expended himself. And the only reason they came back, all justice to Boothie, like, was because that gamble of sorts that Connor took. But if I'm them looking at that going, oh, wait a minute. If he goes at that hard in the beginning, he doesn't have it in the end.
Right.
So what do I extrapolate from that?
Yeah, he is human, right?
Barely, but yes.
Barely.
You were saying, I mean, well, you were saying, that we haven't really seen him. I'll say like a third of the time he loses, it's because he got beat. This is our sort of observation.
Yeah.
The other times it's because he's done something to, like, diminish his chances of victory, I'll say.
Right. An odd line, a fall at a buoy. I think the example we talked about the other day was he rode like the hollow 20-inch sprint at the Hungary ICF, and it was much windier than anyone thought, and it was really like his first or second time on the board. And I think he mentioned afterward that he was full of regret in his bird choice around the second of 3 laps in that race. So yeah, I think it's interesting. He sticks out to me, not because solely of his physical prowess, but because of he doesn't lose because he gets beat very often, which is a pretty phenomenal statistic to think about.
Yeah. There's a lot of people who watch this and protest, go, well, falling at the buoy, not being able to manage your board, that's all part of the athleticism.
It
All
is.
fair, all
It
fair. But
is.
the fact is he rarely just gets mowed down in a 1-to-1 comparison. Like it requires some kind of minor or major mishap or miscalculation on his part. Like he has to expose himself
Right.
to being beaten rather than like
Yeah.
someone exposing him.
But to your point, right? Like if a couple people recognize this and band together and start poking the bear, right? Like maybe you expose a weakness and you get that fall or mishap that you're looking for. On the flip side, you have like the Michael Jordan scenario where you keep poking the bear and the bear's going to roar at some point, and maybe that's not what
Yeah.
you want, you know?
Yeah. Well, so going back to the concept of these unique races, and a river race is not necessarily unique. I mean, two of the most famous races, in fact, the two most famous races in the United States are river races. Chattajack and the Gorge.
Yeah,
In fact,
true.
the Gorge is so famous, we almost don't even think of it as a river race.
I always forget that it's on a river.
Yeah. It's just like this gnarly body of water, like it's a rectangle.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but it spills out into the Atlantic Ocean after descending from the Canadian Rockies. It's a full-on river,
True.
Atlantic Pacific Ocean, whatever I said. But the point is like they create two of our most famous races. We constantly are thinking about ocean races, saltwater races, and it's kind of funny when you think about it. And you see this race on the river, races on the Seine, on the Thames have all been really exciting races. I kind of wonder if we haven't overlooked the variability that they present, that they inject into a field that is well known. It's one thing when it's a bunch of weekend warriors like us. When you have the pros out there, this race was so exciting because it sort of turned into a real strategy session.
Oh, yeah. And I think, particularly thinking about US paddlers, right? Like most states don't have access to coastal water. So you're paddling on lakes and or rivers. And so I think that not only is it just good to see other races presented on the international
Yeah,
stage, uh, but it resonates more with people, right? You can see what kind of strategies or what kind of tactics these guys are employing in
totally.
those type of conditions, and then go back and try to do that on your home waters rather than just
Yeah,
watching Connor or Shrimpy surf down a wave or Candace whipping a buoy in the middle of the surf or whatever, and you living in Oklahoma be like, oh man, that looks cool, but here I am.
yeah, yeah. No, it was very cool. And I don't know, the race, just generally speaking, was a lot of fun to watch. It'll be our both of our mutual understanding is that both Noah Gariud and Tituan Puyo were caught up in travel struggles, and weren't there. It would have been really interesting to see that race had those guys been there as well. I got to say though, our the hero for USA SUP, as we think about it, USA Stand Up Paddleboarding, not necessarily just the organization, but seeing Connor doing distance was a lot of fun, and it was pretty amazing how well he did. I mean,
Yeah.
the guy is just, he's been, I think, over the past, Shrimpy's been a lot of fun, but Connor in a lot of ways has been, like, I would say, borderline inspirational. He had this lull, it felt like, for a couple of years, and his focus and seeming enjoyment of the competition has been so much fun over the past few years because he's killing it.
Yeah, I agree. Like seeing the joy come back in a competitor like that is really, it's good for the sport, first off, right? And it's also just good to see because you don't want to see anybody not having a good time. And I think him making the conscious switch to focus primarily on the sprints and tech races is what allowed him to not only
I
find
think so.
success, but the joy in racing. And now he's doing distance stuff for shits and giggles,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
just
I
to
wish
qualify for
I
overall.
could be right. And I wish, you and I could go finish fifth in a EuroTour race for shits and giggles, but instead we're doing this podcast.
Yeah. for shits and giggles. Okay, so let's talk about one of the reasons that Connor does any distance ever is for overall classification stuff.
Right.
To get those results. So one of the things, okay, well, quick, this podcast as ever is brought to you by USA SUP. So first of all, a lot of folks watching this are probably members or maybe even recently lapsed members. So if you're not a member, please join. If you are a member, make sure that you are renewing or set up to renew. It is a little bit of a rigmarole. You might have received an email. Please go do it. It's very worthy. The support, you guys have no idea how far the dollar gets stretched for us to be able to do a lot of things, including the upcoming national championship. So let's talk about that. There's going to be sprints. There's going to be tech racing, probably a 1K or less tech course, 200-meter sprints, and then, of course, a distance race, which is shaping up really nicely. All in Long Beach, all the weekend of kind of like November 10th to 12th. You and I were talking about this. How do you, okay, so winner, if you had to, and I'm not saying this is what we're doing, Matt and I do not speak for the USA SUP on this matter, but if you were going to say, like, how are you going to distribute purse earnings? I think you and I both agreed that it would be cool to have just like you give most, if not all, of the money to an overall winner for the three races combined. Your thoughts?
Yeah, agreed. I think we could have our discussions and arguments between ourselves and with somebody else or anybody else and have different propositions that would all be feasible and good. But the idea of presenting a cash purse or heavily weighting at least the overall, I think is good for the sport on the whole. It incentivizes people to participate in all three events, first off. And it also showcases all three events and doesn't diminish any one of them for somebody who might be psyched on, let's say, sprints, right? If we only give 10% weight to sprints, somebody who's psyched on it might not be incentivized to go ahead and train for that thing if it doesn't really count, so to say. You?
No, I agree. And so we were talking, I mean, I think the way I would break it down, if like on a 10-point scales, you think about how you're going to then, assign points for an overall. To me, distance is still the premier event in the sport. I think 10Ks are generally perceived, if not actually incentivized to be the premier event around the globe and in this country too. And so that would be like half the overall score to me. And then I think tech racing is like number 2. And that would be like, 30%. And then the final 20 would be sprints, which are a lot of fun, but not necessarily a common standalone event. But that way, because our tech race is going to be pretty short, it's essentially a sprint tech. And so if you are a sprint heavy person, you have a chance to clean up in half of those points. And now you got to go do distance, vice versa. I think it'll yield probably the right batch of podium finishers.
Yeah, well put. I couldn't agree more. But that said, if somebody out there has a different or dissenting opinion, please let us know in the comments or email us at USA SUP. We, like Adam said, we do not speak for all parties involved here, nor is this officially decided yet. So let us know if you have cool ideas on how we should weight the three events at our national championship event in November.
Yeah, and if you own a giant business and want to contribute to the purse, we're all for it.
Ooh, yeah. Or a live streaming / drone business and want to help broadcast the thing. That'd be great too.
No, we're going to get too much help there. There's a lot of dronies. There's a lot of overlap with like drone pilots in the SUP. Although it'd be cool if you want to bring your drones, please do.
Dronies? Is that the technical term for it?
I just made it up, but it seems pretty good.
I like it. I like it. Yeah.
It's got to exist already, but I don't think I coined it. But I think that the having a really well-attended distance event and then kind of making it so that the Connor Baxters of the world are still competitive for the top place, because you clean up in a short tech sprint and you clean up in sprints, and then got to go out and just manage a distance race. I really like the way that feels, and vice versa. If you're a distance racer, you really got to kick butt there, and then you better be able to turn your board and go fast on it so you can hang on in those other events. Which is, so whatever your discipline is, you still need to be well rounded in some way or another, which I think is the right way to go.
I agree.
Hey, this was a good one. We wanted to keep it tidy. We've bludgeoned people with some extra long segments.
We have.
Of note, we've been in touch with Seychelles. We really want to hear from her. She did a thing that's near and dear to my heart, which is the 70-48 race here in the Puget Sound. We've talked about it before on the podcast, but it's a 70-mile race. You have 48 hours to complete it, thus the name. It goes essentially up most of, kind of sort of, the Puget Sound. It's an overnight race. She did it, I think, in 15 and a half hours or so, which is pretty darn fast. It is a grueling race. We want to bring her on to talk about that, plus her pretty inspiring reemergence. No doubt that she is going to be this time next year probably kicking some butt if that's a choice she wants to make. But she's got some cool stuff going on in her life, and it's just good to always talk to racers who have changing and shifting perspectives. So looking forward to that at some point, hopefully this summer. It's busy.
Yeah, look for that maybe mid to late July. We should have a chat with Seychelles out. Fingers crossed.
We'll give it our best shot.
You heard it here.
All right, perfect. You're even if it's just Matt and Seychelles. I've been traveling a lot.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, Matt, always good to chat with you. Folks, thanks. Like Matt said, like, subscribe, comment, let us know. There's a few things we talked about. Smash the like button. All right. Hey, thanks, buddy.
Thank you, everybody.